So hello, my name is Tatiana and here is Arvid. We are from Norway. But I was born in Russia and my mother was part of the Russian space program. So I was brought up on a lot of stories and facts about space exploration. And when preparing my presentations, I quite often borrow some wisdom from these stories and facts. So this thing has to start to work, I hope. I click on this one and then, yes. So look at this list. You're not supposed to be able to read it. It's the number of items that is important here. 202. It's a number of scientific experiments that the latest space expedition has completed. And 202, that's just the list. And it's not only scientific results that this expedition has achieved. They have also unloaded 4 cargo spacecrafts. They have also completed spacewalks with a 21-hour plus duration in total. And they made a lot of pictures like this one and also participated in some educational programs live. Quite a lot of stuff. Here's the result of some other space expedition. The first ever space expedition. The only thing that the first astronaut did was to stay alive. The only thing that Yuri Gagarin did was to fly to the space, make one circle around the Earth, and then turn back. Why was the crew of the 54th International Space Station crew able to do all things that they did this February? Because the station was made for it. There was enough room, enough equipment, the duration of the flight was long enough. They had the possibility to do this because of this space station. Why did not Yuri Gagarin do all these wonderful things? Because his spacecraft was not made for it. His flight plan was not made for it. The only thing that the spacecraft allowed was to fly to the space and then survive. When people started dreaming about space exploration, they planned all this. They wanted to explore space with scientific, technological, and other goals. But the first step towards here was by making Yuri Gagarin make one circle around the Earth and survive it. And the spacecraft was built only for this. Why? Because the goal was not to do all this wonderful stuff, but to prove that us humans can send a man to the space and return him back alive. And it was a space race, so Russia was racing against the US, and it was important to prove this first. So the deadlines were tighter than probably any of us need ever. And they needed to configure the absolute minimum spacecraft. But this absolute minimum has to be viable. Gagarin had to return back alive, right? So it was what they configured. The absolute minimum that was just enough. The MVP of a spacecraft. So this is what we're going to talk about now. The absolute minimum that is just enough. How to configure the first steps towards what we want to build. Towards the product that will help us to conquer the world, reach the stars, and do all wonderful things. How to configure the first minimum step. And we are going to talk about how to implement this known concept of MVP in the practice of software development. Very practical steps that we do and we hope that you can also do. And we cover this from all perspectives that are involved. It's not only design, it's not only business that is involved in creating configuring the MVP. It's 3 disciplines, design, business, and development. That's why we are 2 on this stage. I'm experienced designer and I represent the design side, while Arvid represents technical and developer perspective.
Yes, my name is Arvid. My role is being a technical architect, and I assemble the teams that build the products. And it's me who initially talk about the roadmap with the product owners. And traditionally, the roadmap planning starts with a list of features that the new product is supposed to have. And product owners want to have them in the market as soon as possible. But in the first version, he cannot have them all, so we have to select some of them. So this is how the traditional method of defining the minimum version begins, selecting which features to include in the MVP. They examine each feature one by one and decide if it goes into the MVP or not. How do they decide? Okay, because the competitors have it, or maybe it's the chairman's pet idea. All these can be quite emotional, and there's a lot of subjective judgment in this process. But at the result, we finally select a couple of key features, and then we add some features related to security, support, profile, etc. And then some other standard stuff, and now we have on the right the key features that we have selected plus some necessary standard ones. And this set of features is supposed to be the MVP, and what is wrong with that? How do we know that all these features belong to the MVP? How do we know that all of them are necessary? We don't really know. We did not apply any objective criteria when we selected them. And how do we know we cover the end-to-end user experience? How do we know that we have not forgotten something? And that there are no holes in the product that we have just configured? Again, there's no objective criteria telling us. And how can we protect the MVP from growth? Every time after development has started, someone comes with a great idea of a new feature, and they want to include that in the MVP. And then another one, and there is no way, no bulletproof reason for us to say no. So MVP defined by feature is not minimum and not end-to-end, and it's always growing. So here is the problem that we try to solve. We suggest to start by examining the features that are listed and consider them in the light of business goals. Every project and businesses have or should have a business plan. This plan should include some business goals. These goals are important to consider when you assemble or put together the each feature item must be understood in the light of at least one of the goals. One obvious type of goal is to provide customer value. And what is customer value? In business plans, these are often referred to as value propositions. They are values that the company offers its customers through products and services. Our MVP should focus on minimum one of them. What you see here is a business model canvas, a business plan in one page. It consists of 9 topics, which combined gives a pretty good understanding of a business. Now, let's have a look at the value proposition from a company I guess most of you know already, Uber. One of the great values they bring to the customer is simplicity. So, one tap and a car comes directly to you. Have they been able to achieve this? Well, more or less I should say, but it's still very easy to get a car where you are. Your driver knows exactly where to go. Very useful. I use Uber in places where they don't speak English, and I don't have to explain where to go. Payment is completely cashless. This means that I do not have to bring cash, especially very handy when being abroad. Another type of goal is start earning money. Some businesses can have other initial goals than making money, but for Uber it was important to be able to pay the drivers from day one. No drivers would drive if they were not paid. This implies that both credit card charges must be in place from day one, as well as payout to the drivers. Another type of goal, key assumptions. Most business plans are built on some assumptions. An example of that is Google Glass. The assumption was that people wanted to wear something on their eye and give them contextual information about their surroundings. And it was not validated. So after the product has been 8 months in the market, it was pulled back. People didn't use it. So the assumption was wrong. So it became a product failure. And we don't want that to happen for our products, do we? And this is why we try to identify the assumptions the product is built on and validate them as early as possible. It can also be different types of assumptions. So we are from Norway. Maybe you heard that in Norway you can meet polar bears on the streets. And yes, there are 5 million people in Norway, and so why don't we make a polar bear scaring device so we can protect those poor Norwegians? But it turns out that the polar bears they are only visible in a small island having 2,000 people. And if you Google this, you will figure out. So this assumption can be verified by online search. But other assumptions cannot be validated by research. They have to be tested in real life. So Twitter, a product that lets the user send 140 characters to each other, to say it simple. And no research could actually say that this product would be successful. Only real-life testing, only people would tell that this was gonna fly. If our products are built on one or more assumptions, we should pay attention to it. Build user base. Many companies grow user base as the main goal in order to make money after reaching some critical mass, like advertising. Facebook and Instagram, obviously, on advertising. Skype, they use Skype credit, and Skype has also some additional income streams. But first, they had huge amount of users. Other goals could be attracting attention, whether it's media, investors, important partners. Sometimes we just need to make headlines to be seen. Now we have gone through many goals as the business might have. Now we start structuring the initial features and see them in the light of the goals. For this we use a roadmap. And what is a roadmap? It is a strategic plan that defines the goal or desired outcome, and it includes the major steps or milestones needed to reach it. It also serves as a communication tool, a high-level document that helps us phrase the strategic thinking, the whys behind the goal, and the plan for getting there. Said in a more practical way, the roadmap is a high-level to-do with indication of high-level tasks, timeline, estimation of work, how the to-dos depend on each other, and which goals they try to fulfill. Let me show you how this is done on an example. Recently we have been working with a recruitment portal. Here are some of the features that were suggested. So, create searchable, structured profiles of candidates, allow structured job offerings, smart filtering of candidates, automatic find candidate profile that match the job, video presentation of the candidates in the CV. And some of the goals that were listed, it's like, let recruiters find the most suitable candidate, build structured database of candidate CVs, start earning money, attract investors, and create the most user-friendly recruitment platform on the market. Here's how it looks like. This is a shrink-down version of it, but we put this feature in this roadmap. The goals are represented by colors, and the features are in the boxes, and the length and position indicates on timeline and the scope of work on them. And here, in this, we indicate what became the most important goal. Let the recruiters find the most suitable candidate for the job. The minimum we had to offer for achieving that was filtering candidates. A lot of things was necessary to fulfill this single feature, like creating candidate profile and some other things. But then we figured out that you can leave out 3 big features that had other goals than the one that we ended up with as the mandatory goal. Now we have identified the understanding how initial goals for the first release, we start working on how to get there. Tatiana.
How to get there, we start with design side, after the business has done what Arvid has described. So we have established the goal, and we need to configure the product, the minimal product that will help us reach this goal, and make sure that the product is minimal. The key thing here is we do not ask ourselves what this product should be. We don't ask ourselves what parts should this product contain, what functionality we need. First, we ask ourselves what the product needs to do. What is it that we are trying to make happen? We need to describe what we are trying to make happen. How is the world different? How the world will be different when this first version is out. Just describe it by words. And in order to do this, we have to understand what is happening now and who are the people we are building this for and what they are doing, what are their tasks, what are their goals, what are their limitations, what are their demographics, what are their behavior and other characteristics in the area where we are building the product. So, and the standard tool that we use for documenting this knowledge about the users and their behavior and the current state of things is personas, fictitious characters that represent the patterns in goals, needs, demographics, and other information about our audience. And the best case, if these descriptions, all of them are based on real data, on the result of the user research that we have done. What if we don't have time for this? What if we are not given this time by business or by other reasons? In this case, we have to document what we think that users are, our assumptions about the users. We need, in some kind of way, document what are the people we are building this for. And part of this description will be based on assumptions, but part of it, even if we don't have the possibility to do research, can be based on second-hand data. If we don't have access to the users, we can have access to those who work with them. We can do some online research. We can find other ways to get some information about the current state of things, about the people we are building this for. How much of these descriptions can be based on data, how much of the, on assumptions, how much must be based on data depends on the level of certainty that you need. Using assumptions instead of data is including more risk into your product. It's a compromise, and the price of the compromise is the level of certainty that you have. So you have to weigh how expensive it will be if part of this description, if this or that part of the description is not right. So you have to know how expensive it will be, money-wise or in other aspects. And so we have to describe the current state of things, the people and their goals as clearly and as fully as possible. The next thing, after we have a vision of what the people are, who the people are, we need to decide to know what is it actually needs to happen. Arvid has described that we want the recruiters to be able to filter the candidates, but there are also other things that are included into making this possible. It's not only this feature that we are making possible, but we also need to have some other parts of it, some other high level to do that we need to make possible. But we need to make it possible not for roles, we need to make it possible for the people we have identified. So we have to take each of these representatives of the audience, each of these people, and walk through the to-do that was suggested when defining the goal. And describe what happens in just simple words. And in UX jargon, it's called scenarios. So we need to write these scenarios for all personas that we have. And I will show this on the same example. Arvid has started using this recruitment portal. The goal, as Arvid has said, it was start allowing the recruiters to select the most suitable candidates by filtering by a mandatory requirement, by some applying some clever filtering, and the things that the current solutions did not allow was filtering by mandatory requirements. And we had some reasons to believe that if we give this value to the users, and the rest is pretty basic, then the product will be able to be used initially in a free version, and then we can gradually move it to the paid version. So the goal of the first release was to start allow filtering. And so, as I have said, we have to understand who we build this for, and the people we are building this for is this guy David, who works in oil and gas field, and we know he hires both offshore and onshore, and we know that this area is highly regulated. We know quite a bit about this guy. Of course, this description is just a part of it. The full will not fit here. And we have another persona that was targeted by this release. It's Dorothy. She has an HR in a power provider company. and she needs to build an IT department for her company. So these were there were other personas in the whole setup, but these were the two we were targeting with the first release. In our case, these main personas do not exist without in isolation. We need another role. We need candidates which they hire. We need to have complementary personas. And we have a mechanical engineer out of job, and we have a freshly graduated Java developer here. So we have the set of personas that will enable this end-to-end flow that we are trying to support. So we need to have the walkthrough. We need to understand how the process will look for these guys. We just take each of them and walk through the process and describe what needs to happen. How we describe it, I'll show on an example how this oil and gas guy describes the position he wants to create, and this is a part of the create a position scenario. He needs a mechanical engineer to send to an offshore platform in the North Sea, and the candidate must have a valid offshore security course certificate and 2 mandatory and 1 optional professional certificates. The candidate must also speak both English and Norwegian because his team will be probably international. This is how we write it. What is important here? I write what this guy needs and what this guy does, but I do not write how. I write what these requirements are. I have not put the names of the certificates, they're in Norwegian. But I've said that he needs a certain level of one of them. And one of them is mandatory and one of them is not mandatory. But I have not written in a drop-down, he selects a certificate he needs. I have not mentioned the interface element drop-down. And I've not even mentioned if he selects this certificate or writes it down. And this is very important. We know at this stage, it does not matter. We don't know how he does it. We know what he needs to do. We know the task. We describe the task. But we do not describe the solution to this task. We do not jump to the solution too early. The main requirement for these scenarios is it must be solution agnostic. We will find the solutions later on. Now I describe what information is passed from the user to the system and back. I need this level of the certificate, done, nothing more. Not the way I tell this to the system. How this information is passed does not matter now. I don't know. So this is the first important point about the scenarios, how we write them. The second point, I keep it to the minimum. When we are creating the scenarios, we discuss the optimal ways. We discuss what the user would like to have. But we write down only the minimum. We are making sure that this minimum step is in the right direction, not in the opposite from the minimum. But we write only the minimum. The third point, I'm working through the whole flow, the whole thing that Arvid has put in the roadmap, from the beginning to the end. I'm not writing only how he creates the position and how he filters the candidates. I'm writing the whole thing from his perspective. And from his perspective, the scenario must be contextual for this persona. And the context we know, because we know who this person is, what are the types of job he posts, what are his timelines, etc., etc. And here's an interesting thing. When you start writing a scenario like this, if you lack some information in the first place, this is where you will see it. Oi, I don't know how this happens. I need to go and do some research. And then you do the precise research on the point that you need to know. Not a wide one, but a narrow one that gives you the necessary information. So we do this for all personas, and if it's a first release of the product, it can be quite a set. If it's an additional feature that we are building, it can be still a set, but not that big one. And this set of stories, written in human language, is the first documentation of the vision of the product that we are building. Yes, very low fidelity document, very high level vision of the product. But already at this stage, at this high level, we need to share this vision on this artifact with the team. And here, some people get uncomfortable. I bet some of you have started thinking, I cannot write these stories. I'm not a writer. It will take me forever and the result will be crappy. Or, if I manage to write these things and present this to my product owner as the first version of the first release, they will roll their eyes at me. What is this funny, fluffy stuff? Are we designing with fairy tales? Well, having scenarios documented as just stories is one way, but not the only way. When going for this way, we have to consider your writing skills, but also the team culture and the team history. If the team knows you very well and they are ready to go for all crazy, non-orthodox way of designing with you, fine. And I know that, for example, in the US, they can not only listen to the stories, but also write the stories with the designer and also role play the stories. You'll be this persona, you'll be that persona, let's run through this. Creative work. Probably here in the UK, it will not work like this in some of the teams. Back home in Norway, it also doesn't work like this. So we find the way to share the scenario depending on the team culture and depending on the level of trust to your methods that you have. So in the recruitment portal, the team knew me very well, so I actually shared the stories. But with majority of other clients, I do not, after I have written the story, I boil them down to bullet lists, like this one. I will not read through this one. Now, the point is that it's just a detailed step. Only to-do list for this persona, without much contextual details, we discuss these details. When we go through them with the team, we discuss them, but I don't put them in the original artifact. I don't scare people away. I don't tease people with artifacts that will be not very comfortable for them. So the form does not matter. If you and your team are more comfortable with bullet lists, okay. If you are better with storyboards, that's fine too. So the form doesn't matter. It's important that it's a step-by-step description what people do. The description seen from the eyes of these people, and it's important that, as I have said, it's solution agnostic, minimal, and the rest of the things that I said about the scenarios. So I'll keep calling them scenarios and we'll be using the stories, but keep in mind that the form can be different and suitable for your team. So we need to share these scenarios, as I have said. Whom do we need to share this with? Oops. Something happened. No input is detected. Is it here or is it there?
I just need to give it a little. There was.
HDMI?
Will that
Not sure. No.
No. Okay.
Right.
Okay, I'll try not to breathe much. Okay, so who we need to share this with? We need to share this with Arvid has to stop walking, or?
It's been a little bit funny all day.
It's always funny all day when we are speaking. We've been through worse, so it's all right. So we need to share with a product owner or somebody else who has a good understanding of the product side and also has the authority to make product decisions, because we are going to make product decisions now. Another side is a technical architect or developers representing each platform, including backend. Because it's the people who can answer the technical questions, answer how difficult it is to implement this or that, and who can suggest solutions that designers may not be aware of. And the third side is the domain experts. Especially if the domain is rather specific, you have to have early enough validation that what we suggest rings true from the domain side. This is a must-have. Nice to have is also to have a representative of the users, either as a part of this initial discussion or as a separate walkthrough. Then it will be user testing on scenario level. I have managed to do this only partially and not on every project, so it's a direction of improvement for me, but that's a very advisable direction. So this is about the participants. Now about what we do with them. So we walk through the scenarios, as I've said, and doing the following. We validate our vision. That is technically doable, and that is something that we want as a product. So the first thing is validation. Then we correct these scenarios. We listen to other opinions and we see where things can be done, where things are suggested wrong or can be done differently, better. And the most important thing, here's where we're starting adding details. Here that we're starting discussing solutions. So far, everything was solution agnostic. We were describing what needs to happen, but not how. Now we are starting to discuss how this or that user task can be solved. We walk through these scenarios and discuss the minimum version that will enable us to move further later on, that will not put us in the corner. That's why the technical people are very important. They will be able to see where we are putting ourselves in the corner. And we need to, and as we are discussing, we are trying to find the minimum solutions. We need to make shortcuts. We need a product side that will sign off on the shortcuts. Yes, we can live with this shortcut. And another thing that is happening here is that we are getting the real understanding of what we are building. Initially, each of us look at what we are planning to build from their own perspective. We are talking about the same thing, and we think that we are talking about the same thing. But everybody has their own vision of it. By walking through the explicitly written steps, we put our visions on the table, and we see where we differ. During the discussion, each of us corrects their vision. So as a result, we have the real shared understanding of what we are building. And it's important that the document over which we are discussing this is a very simple document. It's easy to understand. It's easy not to misunderstand. There will be other documents. There will be user journey flows. There will be information architecture diagrams and other complex supportive documents in the process. So it's not, we are not designing only with this, but the core of the understanding of what we are building and what we are trying to make happen lays in making these stories, in discussing what we are trying to make happen. So when we have reached the agreement on what we are trying to make happen, the last thing that is needed from the designers is to add sketches. How do we jump from stories to the sketches? We look at each of the steps, and here's the one for David. And we see what the user needs, this user needs in this step. Then we look at what another user needs on this step. This is the woman who is trying to find a Java developer with at least a bachelor level of relevant education. And that is part of the scenario for her. And we put these scenarios together and see what both of them need here. And make a fragment of the interface that will help both of them do what they need. And we will see that even though these people go through the same steps, what they need here will differ, slightly or not so slightly, because they're different personas. Their contexts are different. What they know is different. Their tasks are different. That's why initially they are different personas. David here needs certificates, as I've said before, and language. And Susan needs education and language. So we sketch the interface that will consider the needs of both. And the important thing here is the sketch is this fidelity. It's not because I cannot draw. It's because this is intentional. Not finished beautiful mock-ups. Not yet. Here's why. Because it's only what matters that is drawn here. We focus on what matters. We are not distracted by additional details. It helps to keep attention focused. We don't lead people by a false impression of precision. If you show beautifully drawn mock-ups, the precision of the artifacts implies the precision in thinking. We are thinking only about how to break the whole stuff into screens and what is happening on each screen. We are not through the details, and if the details are in the mock-up, they imply the wrong level of precision. And also we need to discuss this thing, not to sell it. We need honest feedback, and if it's obvious that I have not invested much time in drawing this, people will come with their real opinions and not shut up, not to make me do additional work, because it's obvious that additional work will not take much time. So it's a discussion that we need, not admiration. So this is the approach to this level of sketches. And after these sketches are created, we usually go through, we have the same iteration with our team and add more details, and it's an iterative process. And we shall do this further on, increasing the level of the details in both the scenarios and understanding and the illustration that go with it. But we do not wait until the full design is ready before we jump at the development stage. As soon as we have this detailed enough description of the flow and detailed enough sketches, we are ready to hand over the leading role to the developers. We are ready to make the product backlog out of these fairy tales with illustrations.
After we have reached the agreement on what we want to build, we are ready to start development, and we need to transform the scenarios with the illustrations into a backlog. So first we start finding the user stories, and I'm not going to teach you how to write user stories. I'm going to show you how they are mapped to the scenarios. Let's think that David is working on registration on a new position in the system. His goal is to recruit a person in the oil industry. Then he must be able to add a certificate as a requirement, specify level of certificate, add language as a requirement, and set a requirement as mandatory. We could have some more minutes since we were a bit late, right? Yeah. Susan is Dorothy is looking for a Java developer for her vacant position. She needs to add education as the requirement, level of education, field of education, language as the requirement as well, and specify the level of language. Here is the combination of those two user stories. And we usually map the user stories into a two-dimensional backlog called user story map. So we organize it this way. The main building blocks of the user story map, the blue ones represent the main activities or main parts of the system. The yellow cards is the user flow in the system, and it is in the backbone of the system, and that's a complete yellow line that way. The white cards are the actual user stories, the one we just carved out of the scenarios. The blue and yellow card gives us a lot of context to the user stories along the horizontal axis, since we visually group the user stories. Here we can also add extra requirements, links and other resources in the user stories. We have a tool that we use on this. We can also estimate how much effort it is to develop each user story. So just approximate estimations to understand the relative size of scope. Real estimations can or will be done by developers later. We can group releases vertically as slices. We add user stories to each release, and we look at the scenario to ensure that we cover the end-to-end story in the release. So each release are a useful piece of software. We can even monitor the progress in the story map. We simply connect the user stories here to user stories, for instance, in Jira. Now let's consider the user stories we identified for Dorothy and David. This is how we have added the user stories to the map. All stories are under the main activity, create job. Then the yellow card groups the users like add job description, add requirements, and so on. And we think the map gives us a good understanding of the context of each user story, and we understand the structure of the whole project better, and we understand better the scope, what needs to be built. But this tool is not intended for the developers, so we export these cards to developer backlog like Trello or Jira, and here is basically just a list of user stories in Jira. And then we plan sprint as usual. I'm not going to teach you this, but we put the user story in that we think can fit in the sprint. And then developers take one of user stories and write down more details, tasks, what needs to be done in order to finish this user story. And this will specify level of certificate. And now when this is finished, we go back to this and we see that that one is finished on this map. So it's very easy for us to see the progress. And here is a good feeling we have when all the user stories are finished in a release. Now we are ready to start testing. So I'm going to talk about two ways to test, very brief about user testing. So we take the scenarios that we have shown and write user test scripts that real users execute. They have given tasks to perform in the software, like make a new vacant position in oil industry and require offshore certificate, and see if the user is able to do so. We also use these scenarios for writing automated tests. Dorothy, she wants a Java developer with some requirements of education level. She wants to see only the candidates specifically with master degree and the field IT. So we use a test tool that is using a natural language to implement automated tests. So here is how one of the scripts from the scenario looks like. Here in the feature section we describe what this test is about. And here we add some test data. So here these data are actually prepped in the system when executing this script. And in this part we add the steps that would happen in the system and how to verify the correctness of the system behavior using the test data above. So when we are running the script, you see the output down here. In this case we are lucky, all the scripts passed. That means that our software provides the correct results. And you see that also these steps, they are actually running real Java code. So one interesting thing is that these two lines here, they are running the same function, only with different parameters. So we can actually write bigger scripts with the same syntax without touching any real code. And these ones are very close to the original scenarios. So it's very consistent how we document this. So let's summarize. The main principles behind what we have talked about today is goals first, solution second. First we understand the big idea and the goals, and then we gradually increase the details. Leonardo da Vinci, Mona Lisa. How do you think it was drawn? Did he start with the lower left fragment in details, and the lower right, and the upper left, and the upper right? No. It was drawn like this. It starts with some overview, some vision, and some goal. Then corrections of this vision. Then adding a bit more details and more. And then the final touch. Very nice.
That was the last slide, right?
It was the last slide. So this is the way the great products are always have been made, and this is the way we want to go.